Lena had always been the quiet one in the office. She spoke only when necessary, never interrupted meetings, and was always the first to arrive and the last to leave. Most people at the music company didn't even know much about her. They just saw her as the soft-spoken assistant who kept everything organized, fetched coffee for the executives, and made sure every document was in the right place. The building where she worked was modern and full of life. Posters of famous musicians covered the walls. Everyday talented artists walked in and out, singers, producers, even orchestra members. Lena often felt invisible among them, just another face that no one noticed. Yet she didn't seem to mind. She had learned long ago that peace was better than attention. But sometimes when she passed through the company's lobby, her steps would slow. There in the center of the room stood a glossy black grand piano. Its polished surface reflected the lights above like a mirror. Employees often gathered around it during breaks, some trying to impress others with their limited skills, some laughing when someone hit the wrong key. Lena always kept her distance. Still, her eyes lingered on it every single time she walked by. No one knew that piano used to be her whole world. It was a Tuesday afternoon when everything changed. The office was busy preparing for an upcoming event. People rushed in and out of rooms carrying folders and instruments. The boss, a loud and proud man named Mr. Collins, loved showing off during these times. He liked to remind everyone that he ran one of the most artistic companies in the city. During lunch break, a few workers gathered around the piano again. Someone began playing a cheerful tune, missing notes but laughing through it. "You call that playing?" the boss joked, clapping his hands. "Here, let me show you how it's done." He sat down, playing a few bars of a song he clearly only half knew. Still, everyone clapped. Lena stood nearby, holding a stack of papers. She smiled faintly but said nothing. Then someone from the group turned to her and said teasingly, "Lena, why don't you give it a try? You're always so serious. Let's see if you can play something." The others chuckled. Mr. Collins grinned. "Oh yes, that's a good one," he said loudly. "Let's have our little assistant show us her musical side. Come on, Lena, the piano is all yours." She looked up startled. "Oh no, sir. I don't play." Her voice was soft but steady. He laughed, waving his hand. "You work in a music company and you don't play an instrument? What a shame." His laughter echoed through the lobby. Some joined in, others looked away, feeling slightly uncomfortable. Lena forced a small smile, trying to brush it off. She'd been teased before, but Mr. Collins wasn't done. "Tell you what," he said, still laughing, "if you can play something, anything decent, I'll quit my job right now." The crowd burst into laughter. One of the employees said, "Careful, boss, she might surprise you." Collins smirked. "I doubt it. She looks like she's never touched a piano in her life." Lena felt her cheeks grow warm. For a second, her eyes drifted toward the piano. The black and white keys seemed to call her name, whispering memories she had locked away years ago. She wanted to walk away, but her feet felt heavy. Everyone was still laughing when she quietly said, "I really don't want to play." "See?" the boss said, smiling smugly. "I knew it. She's too scared." Something inside her flickered, not anger, not pride, but a faint ache. She turned and left the lobby without another word. As the day went on, the laughter faded and work resumed as usual. But Lena couldn't shake the feeling that something inside her had been stirred awake. When she got home that evening, the silence of her small apartment felt louder than usual. She took off her shoes, placed her bag on the table, and sat down on the couch. Her eyes wandered to the corner of the room, where a covered keyboard sat beneath a thin layer of dust. She hadn't touched it in years. She stood up slowly, walked over, and pulled off the cloth. The sight of it made her chest tighten. She pressed one key. The sound was slightly off but familiar. She tried another, then another. Soon her fingers began moving without thought, finding their way through a melody that had once been her favorite. Tears welled up in her eyes as memories poured in. She remembered being a child, sitting beside her father as he watched proudly while she practiced. She remembered performing on stage, the lights warm on her face, the applause echoing like thunder. She remembered the joy, the peace, the way music made her feel alive. And then she remembered the day it all stopped. Her father's accident had changed everything. With hospital bills and family struggles, her dream of being a pianist had vanished overnight. She took whatever work she could find, first as a waitress, then as an office assistant. The piano became something she couldn't afford to think about anymore. But that laugh, That cruel, mocking laugh from earlier that day brought everything back. Not the pain, but the fire. That night, Lena sat by the keyboard for hours. She played softly at first, her hands rusty but determined. Slowly, the old rhythm returned. Her touch grew confident again. It was as if her soul had been asleep all this time and the music was waking it up. By midnight, she stopped and looked at her reflection in the window. For the first time in years, she smiled, not out of politeness, but because she felt something real. The next morning at work, people whispered about the moment from yesterday. Some thought the boss went too far. Others said it was all in good fun. When Lena entered, a few of them looked at her curiously, perhaps feeling a little guilty. She didn't hold it against them. She knew they didn't understand. As she walked past the piano again, she paused for a moment. Her fingers brushed the edge of the instrument. Mr. Collins noticed and smirked. "Thinking about taking me up on that offer, Lena?" he said, half joking. She met his gaze calmly and said, "Maybe one day, sir." He laughed and walked away, not realizing that something had shifted. That night, Lena went home and practiced again. Every key she pressed brought her closer to who she used to be. She stayed up late, losing track of time until the notes flowed naturally once more. She didn't know it yet, but fate was quietly arranging something. The company had an upcoming event, a corporate dinner where investors and musicians would gather. And there, a piano would be waiting. For now, though, she simply played for herself, her apartment filled with sound, gentle, nostalgic, powerful. Outside, the city lights flickered, unaware that somewhere inside a small room, a forgotten pianist was awakening again. Lena closed her eyes and let the music carry her. In that moment, the pain of her past melted away. She wasn't the quiet assistant anymore. She wasn't the woman people mocked. She was the girl who once played from her heart, the girl her father had believed in. When she finally stopped playing, it was nearly dawn. She looked at her hands, trembling slightly, and whispered to herself, "Maybe it's time." The next day, she entered the office with quiet confidence. No one noticed the change in her right away, but she felt it deeply. The laughter from before no longer mattered. She had nothing to prove to anyone, but part of her wondered what would happen if she did sit down at that piano again. For years, she had hidden behind silence. But now the music was calling her back. And deep down, she knew sooner or later she would answer that call. The next few days at the office passed quietly, but something inside Lena had changed. On the surface, she was still the same calm, polite assistant, the one who smiled softly, handled everyone's requests, and blended into the background. But inside, her thoughts were different now. Every time she passed the piano in the lobby, she could almost hear the music again. It wasn't just an instrument anymore. It was like a heartbeat that refused to stay silent. Her co-workers went on with their usual chatter. Some of them still teased her gently about that day when the boss had mocked her. "Careful, Lena," one of them joked. "Next time you might actually have to play." She only smiled, not saying a word. They had no idea how close she really was to doing exactly that. At night, her small apartment was no longer quiet. The keyboard that had been silent for years now came to life every evening. At first, her fingers stumbled over the keys. But she didn't stop. Her body remembered what her mind had forgotten. The movements became smoother, the sound clearer. Slowly, the old magic began to return. Every note carried a memory. She remembered her childhood home, a tiny apartment filled with laughter and music. Her father used to sit beside her, tapping his foot as she practiced. "Feel the song, Lena," he would say. "Don't just play it. Let it speak." Those words had stayed with her, even when everything else had fallen apart. Her mother worked long hours back then, and her father was her biggest cheerleader. When she won her first local competition at 10 years old, he cried more than anyone else in the room. "One day," he told her, "you'll play for the world." But life doesn't always keep its promises. When her father's accident happened, everything stopped. The hospital bills piled up, and there was no one to help. Her mother's health broke down from stress. Lena sold her piano, the one her father had saved for years to buy, just to pay rent. She never told anyone how much it hurt to let it go. For months after that, she couldn't even look at another piano. It reminded her of everything she had lost. She found the office job through a friend, hoping for something steady. She told herself she'd left music behind for good. But the truth was, music never left her. It waited quietly in the corners of her heart, patient and forgiving. Now, after so many years, that silence was breaking. One night after work, she sat by the window, listening to the faint sound of rain tapping against the glass. The world outside was quiet, but her thoughts were loud. She wondered what her father would say if he saw her now, still surrounded by music, yet pretending she wasn't part of it. She looked at the keyboard and whispered, "I miss you, Papa." Then she began to play again. The song that came out wasn't written anywhere. It was made of memories, laughter, tears, love, loss, all tangled into sound. She played until the rain stopped and the first light of morning peeked through the window. For the first time in years, she felt peace. At work, something unusual happened the following week. The company was preparing for its annual gala dinner, a big event where clients, musicians, and sponsors would gather. The theme this year was the power of music. Everyone was excited except Lena, who quietly focused on making sure all the paperwork was in order. One afternoon, during a planning meeting, the event coordinator mentioned that the hired pianist might not be available. "We might need a backup performer," she said, looking a little worried. Mr. Collins laughed. "Well, if our assistant here can't handle it, we'll find someone else," he said jokingly, nodding toward Lena. The room chuckled. Lena just smiled politely, pretending it didn't bother her. But later that night, as she packed her things, the coordinator stopped by her desk. "Hey," she said softly. "You know, I've noticed how you look at the piano sometimes. You used to play, didn't you?" Lena froze for a moment. "A little," she admitted. The coordinator smiled kindly. "You should play again. I can tell you miss it." That simple sentence stayed in Lena's mind long after she went home. It was strange how one small moment could feel like a push from the universe. That night she practiced again, not for herself this time, but with a purpose. She didn't know if she would ever perform publicly again, but she wanted to be ready, just in case. Her hands moved faster than before. She played songs she hadn't touched since childhood. She laughed when she hit a wrong note and started over again. There was no audience, no pressure, just her and the music. Meanwhile, back at the office, rumors started spreading about how good she might actually be. One of her coworkers claimed to have seen her playing once during lunch break, when no one was around. "I thought it was a recording," he said. But it was her. The story reached the boss, who laughed even harder. "Her, a pianist? Please," he said. "If she plays at the gala, I'll quit on the spot." It was a joke, but one he repeated several times over the next few days. People began to quote it, half as a dare, half as amusement. "If you play, I'll quit," he'd say with a smirk whenever Lena passed by. She didn't react anymore. Instead, she just smiled, because deep down something in her was changing. The teasing no longer hurt. It fueled her. On the weekend, she decided to visit an old place she hadn't seen in years, the community music hall where she had performed as a teenager. It was quieter now, smaller than she remembered. Dust floated in the sunlight that streamed through the windows. She walked up to the old piano in the corner, the same kind they used back then. Her hands trembled as she touched it. A janitor nearby looked up and said, "You can play if you want. No one's used that one in a while." She nodded, sat down, and began to play softly. The sound filled the empty hall. The notes echoed against the walls, gentle and haunting. She felt as if she were talking to her younger self, the girl who believed music could heal anything. Halfway through the song, she noticed the janitor standing still, listening with his mouth slightly open. When she finished, he clapped slowly. "Miss, that was beautiful," he said. "You should be on a stage, not behind an office desk." She smiled quietly. Maybe someday. On her way home, she couldn't stop thinking about that. Maybe someday. When Monday arrived, she felt lighter. She moved through the office with quiet energy. The piano in the lobby no longer looked like a piece of furniture. It looked like a door waiting to be opened. She started coming in early, before anyone else, just to sit near it. At first, she didn't touch the keys, only stared. But one morning, when the building was still empty, she sat down and let her fingers play a soft tune. Just for herself. She didn't know that one of her coworkers had walked in early too. He stopped at the doorway, listening, frozen in place. The sound was gentle but powerful, filled with emotion that words couldn't express. When she noticed him standing there, she quickly stopped and stood up, embarrassed. "I'm sorry," she said. He shook his head. "Don't be sorry, that was incredible." She smiled faintly and walked away, but her heart was racing. Word spread again. By the next day, people were whispering about what they had heard. Mr. Collins brushed it off. "Nonsense," he said. "People are exaggerating. She probably just knows a few simple tunes." But deep down, he was curious too. The gala was only a week away. The pianist they had hired hadn't confirmed yet. Everyone was nervous, and though no one said it out loud, many were secretly hoping that maybe, just maybe, Lena would take the stage. That night, Lena sat in front of her keyboard at home, staring at the keys. Her fingers hovered above them. The thought of playing in front of people again made her nervous. But another part of her, the part that missed the stage, the part that missed her father, wanted it more than anything. She closed her eyes and began to play, softly at first, then with growing strength. The music filled the room, wrapping around her like a warm memory. She imagined her father sitting nearby, smiling proudly. When she finished, she whispered to herself, "I think I'm ready." She didn't know what would happen next, or if she would ever get the chance to show the world who she really was. But one thing was certain. The fire inside her was alive again, and this time she wasn't going to hide it anymore. The week of the gala came faster than anyone expected. The office was buzzing with excitement. Everyone was running around, fixing decorations, arranging seats, and preparing schedules. It was the company's biggest night of the year, and the boss wanted everything perfect. Lena worked quietly at her desk, typing up last-minute details. She handled all the calls, checked the guest lists, and made sure everything went according to plan. From the outside, she looked calm as ever. But inside, her heart carried a small storm. The official pianist who was supposed to perform still hadn't confirmed. There were rumors he might cancel because of another commitment. People were whispering about it in the hallways. The event coordinator was stressed and tired. "What are we going to do if he doesn't show up?" someone asked. The boss laughed it off at first. "Don't worry, we'll find someone," he said, though his voice didn't sound as confident as usual. Then jokingly he added, "If nothing works, maybe our assistant can entertain the guests." A few laughed. Lena smiled faintly but didn't say anything. That night, as she walked home, she thought about those words again. The same piano that sat in the lobby every day would also be at the event. It wasn't about proving anyone wrong anymore. It was about proving to herself that she still had something special inside her. She had spent every night that week practicing after work, sometimes for hours. Her neighbors, instead of complaining, often stood quietly outside her door, listening. One evening, the old lady who lived next door knocked and said softly, "I don't know what you're playing, dear, but it makes me feel young again." Lena smiled and thanked her. She didn't tell her that the song she played was the same one her father used to hum when times were hard. Every note carried a memory. The day before the event, the company held a final rehearsal. Everyone was there, technicians, hosts, staff, and even the catering team. The stage looked beautiful. Lights hung from above, the sound system was set, and right in the center stood a grand piano shining under the soft yellow light. The hired pianist still hadn't arrived. The event coordinator looked worried. The boss sighed and said, "If he doesn't show up tomorrow, we'll just run background music. We can't risk having an amateur ruin our evening." Lena was standing nearby, holding a clipboard. She didn't look up, but she heard every word. Her hands tightened around the papers. When the meeting ended, everyone left to finish their tasks. The hall grew quiet. Only the soft echo of footsteps remained. Lena walked closer to the stage. She looked at the piano for a long moment, her reflection shining on its surface. She hesitated. Her heart beat faster. She looked around. No one was there. Slowly, she placed her clipboard on a chair and sat down at the piano bench. Her fingers hovered above the keys. For a moment, she just sat still, eyes closed, listening to the silence. Then she began to play. The sound filled the empty room like a voice long forgotten. Each note carried warmth, sadness, and beauty all at once. The melody drifted through the air like a whisper from another time. She didn't notice the door quietly opening behind her. The event coordinator, who had come back to retrieve her phone, froze in place. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Lena's fingers moved effortlessly, gracefully, as if the piano belonged to her. When the song ended, Lena stayed still for a few seconds. Then she opened her eyes and sighed softly. That was beautiful, the coordinator said from behind her. Lena turned quickly, startled. Oh, I didn't see you there, she said, blushing. The woman smiled. You weren't joking when you said you used to play. That was incredible. You should play tomorrow. Lena shook her head immediately. No, I can't. That's the company's biggest event. I'm just an assistant. But you're also the best musician I've heard in a long time, the coordinator said warmly. Please think about it. The pianist still hasn't confirmed, and honestly, you could save the night. After she left, Lena sat in silence again. Her heart raced at the thought. She wanted to say yes, but fear held her back. What if she made a mistake? What if everyone laughed? What if she wasn't ready? That night she couldn't sleep. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, hearing the same question over and over in her mind. What if I try? She got up, walked to her keyboard, and began to play softly in the dim light. The melody she chose was slow, gentle, almost like a conversation between her and the past. With every note, she let go of her fear a little more. By dawn, she had made up her mind. She wasn't doing it for recognition or for the boss, or even for her coworkers. She was doing it for the girl she used to be, the one who loved music more than anything. The next morning, when she arrived at work, she felt calm. The building was busy with preparations, but her heart felt strangely light. She went straight to the event coordinator and said quietly, "If the pianist doesn't come, I can fill in." The woman smiled, relieved. "I was hoping you'd say that." By evening, the hall was full. Guests in elegant clothes arrived, chatting and laughing as they took their seats. The boss moved around confidently, greeting everyone, pretending not to be nervous. But when someone whispered that the hired pianist still hadn't arrived, his smile faltered. "What do you mean he's not here yet?" he said, looking around anxiously. The coordinator approached him calmly. "Don't worry, we have a replacement." "Who?" he demanded. She glanced toward Lena, who was quietly standing near the corner, dressed neatly but humbly. The boss frowned. "Her? Are you serious? This is a professional event, not a talent show." "She's good," the coordinator said firmly. "Trust me," the boss rolled his eyes. "If she plays well, I'll quit my job right now." He said it loud enough for a few people to hear, and they laughed. Lena heard him too. She didn't look up, but she felt the weight of those words. Instead of fear, something like determination rose inside her. She took a deep breath and whispered to herself, "For you, Papa." When the lights dimmed and the announcer welcomed the guests, everyone turned their attention to the stage. The boss looked tense. The coordinator gave a small, encouraging nod, and Lena stepped forward quietly. The audience murmured when they saw her. Some thought she was part of the staff. Others whispered, confused. But when she sat down at the piano, a strange hush fell over the room. Her hands hovered above the keys, and for a moment, the world seemed to pause. Then she began to play. The first few notes were soft and delicate, almost like a whisper. The melody grew richer with every passing second. Her touch was gentle but powerful, her expression calm yet full of emotion. She didn't just play the piano, she spoke through it. The room went silent. Every sound, every movement stopped. People stared, wide-eyed, unable to look away. The boss, who had been smirking moments before, slowly straightened in his seat. His expression changed from amusement to disbelief. Lena's music filled the air like sunlight breaking through clouds. It wasn't loud or flashy, it was pure, heartfelt, alive. She played as if she was telling a story, one of loss, love, and hope reborn. Some guests closed their eyes to feel the melody more deeply. Others watched her fingers in awe. Even the waiters stopped moving for a moment, standing still with trays in their hands. When the final note lingered in the air, the hall stayed silent for a few seconds. Then came the applause, soft at first, then louder, until the entire room was clapping and cheering. Lena slowly stood and bowed, her heart pounding. She couldn't believe it was real. The boss was speechless. He stared at her, unable to say a word. For the first time, he realized the quiet assistant he had mocked was not just anyone. She was something extraordinary. As Lena stepped off the stage, the event coordinator hugged her tightly. "You did it," she whispered. "You saved the night?" Lena smiled softly. "No," she said. "Music did." That night, as she walked home under the soft city lights, she felt lighter than she had in years. The sound of applause still echoed in her ears. But what meant more than anything was that she had finally found herself again. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but one thing was certain. She would never let her music stay silent again. The applause that followed Lena's performance seemed to go on forever. It wasn't the loud, forced kind that people give out of politeness. It was genuine, rising from somewhere deep within the audience. People stood up from their seats, clapping with tears in their eyes. For a long moment, Lena stood frozen beside the piano, unable to move or even breathe. She had played from her heart, not expecting anything in return. But now, looking at the sea of faces moved by her music, she realized she had given them something real. And in return, they had given her back her confidence. The boss sat in silence, unable to speak. The same man who had once mocked her, who had laughed at the idea of her touching a piano, now stared at her like he was seeing her for the first time. His words from earlier, "And if you play, I'll quit," echoed in his mind, and for the first time he wished he had never said them. When the applause finally began to fade, Lena smiled shyly, gave a small bow, and walked off stage. As she stepped into the hallway behind the curtains, her hands trembled. The event coordinator rushed over, hugging her tightly. "You were incredible," she whispered. "You have no idea what you just did out there." Lena smiled, still trying to process everything. "It didn't feel real," she said softly. "It felt like a dream, but it was real. Every note, every emotion, every heartbeat." As the guests mingled after the performance, people began asking about her. Who was that? Where did she come from? How could someone like that be working in an office? The news spread quickly. The company assistant who had left everyone speechless with her performance. Some of the clients even approached the boss, congratulating him for discovering such a hidden talent in his own team. He smiled awkwardly, nodding along, still unsure how to react. When the event ended and the guests left, the boss finally approached Lena. For once, he didn't have his usual arrogance. His tone was calm, even gentle. "You surprised everyone tonight," he said slowly. "I had no idea you could play like that." Lena simply nodded. "It's something I used to do," she replied quietly. "Well," he said, clearing his throat, "you've certainly made the company look good. People won't stop talking about you." She smiled politely, but there was something about his words that made her realize he still didn't fully understand what her music meant. It wasn't about the company or about impressing anyone. It was about healing something inside her that had been broken for a long time. Later that night, when she finally reached home, Lena sat by her window and looked out at the quiet street. The night air was cool, and the city lights shimmered faintly in the distance. For the first time in years, she felt peaceful. She had faced her fear, her memories, and her pain, and turned them into music. She thought about her father again. If he were still alive, he would have been in the front row, probably crying louder than anyone. She smiled at the thought. "I did it, Papa," she whispered. The next morning at work, everything felt different. People greeted her with smiles and admiration. Some who had barely noticed her before now wanted to talk to her, to ask about her music. Even the people who used to tease her seemed nervous around her now. During lunch, a few coworkers sat with her for the first time. "Lena, you were amazing last night," one said. "How did you learn to play like that?" She smiled gently. "It's been a part of me for as long as I can remember." Another asked, "Are you going to perform again?" "You should. People online are already posting about it." She was surprised. "Online?" "Yes," the woman said, showing her phone. A short video clip from the event had been uploaded by one of the guests. It showed Lena at the piano, eyes closed, playing with emotion. The comments were full of praise. "Beautiful performance. This gave me goosebumps." "Who is she?" Lena didn't know what to say. The idea that her private moment had reached strangers around the world felt unreal. Later that afternoon, she was called into the boss's office. She walked in quietly, unsure what to expect. He looked uncomfortable but tried to sound professional. "Lena, I wanted to thank you for last night. The event was a success, and you were a big reason for that." The clients were impressed. Some of them even asked if you'd consider performing again at future events. She hesitated, then said softly, "I appreciate that, but I'm not sure I want to perform for business reasons. I play because I love it." He nodded slowly. For a moment there was silence. Then he added half-jokingly, I suppose I owe you an apology? And maybe even my resignation? She smiled faintly. That won't be necessary. After she left his office, he sat there quietly, realizing how small his words had made him look compared to her humility. Over the next few days, Lena's story spread further. A journalist who had attended the gala reached out to write an article about her, the hidden pianist who stunned everyone. She was hesitant at first, not wanting fame or attention, but the coordinator encouraged her. You can inspire so many people, she said. People who gave up on their dreams might find hope again because of you. That thought touched her. She agreed, but she made one request, that the article not make her sound like a miracle or a star, but simply as someone who found her way back to what she loved. When the article was published, it quickly went viral. People admired her humility as much as her talent. Messages began to pour in from strangers, some telling her how her story reminded them to keep believing in themselves. Lena read each one with gratitude, but she stayed grounded. Every morning, she still arrived early to the office, greeted everyone kindly, and did her work like always. She wasn't chasing fame. She was just following the quiet joy that music brought her. One afternoon, as she was leaving work, she passed the piano in the lobby again. A few young interns were gathered around it, trying to play simple tunes. They looked up when they saw her. Miss Lena, can you show us something? One of them asked eagerly. She smiled, set her bag down, and sat at the piano. All right, she said softly, but only if you promise not to laugh if I mess up. They all laughed. She began to play a light, cheerful tune. The sound filled the lobby, and even some of the staff upstairs leaned over the balcony to listen. For a few minutes, everything felt lighter. The stress, the deadlines, the noise of the world, all faded away. When she finished, everyone clapped. One of the interns said, "You make it look so easy." She smiled warmly. It's not easy. It just feels right. That evening, when she went home, she sat at her old keyboard again, but this time she didn't play alone. The old lady next door knocked and said, "Mind if I listen?" Lena laughed softly and opened the door. Of course not. The neighbor sat by the window while Lena played. The sun was setting, casting a golden light across the room. The sound of the piano mixed with the hum of the city outside. When she finished, the woman wiped a tear from her eye. You have a gift, dear. Don't ever hide it again, Lena nodded. I won't. As the days turned into weeks, more opportunities came her way. Invitations to perform at charity events, schools, and community centers. She accepted a few, not for fame, but because she wanted to share what she had once lost. One evening, she found herself back at the same community music hall where she had played as a teenager. The hall had been renovated, but it still smelled faintly of polished wood and old memories. She walked to the stage and placed her hands on the piano. When she began to play, she felt something shift inside her again, but this time it wasn't pain or longing. It was peace. The audience that night wasn't full of executives or clients. It was families, children, and people who simply loved music. As she played, she looked up for a moment and smiled. She could almost imagine her father sitting in the front row, nodding with pride. By the time she finished, the room erupted in applause again. But this time she didn't cry or tremble. She simply bowed her head and smiled, knowing she was exactly where she was meant to be. Lena's journey hadn't been easy. Life had tested her, humbled her, and silenced her for years. But now her music was alive again, and so was she. The following weeks were unlike anything Lena had ever imagined. Every day brought a new surprise. A phone call from someone who had seen her story online, a letter from a music student saying she inspired them, and even an invitation to perform on a national morning show. At first, she didn't believe it was real. She kept reading the email again and again, thinking it must have been sent to the wrong person. But it wasn't. They had seen her performance video from the company gala, and they wanted to share her story with the country. When she showed the message to her boss, he leaned back in his chair, whistling softly. Well, he said, half joking, I guess you're famous now. Lena shook her head quickly. I'm not famous, she said. I just played the piano. That's all. But deep down, she knew this meant something more. Not fame, but a chance to use her story to remind others that dreams never truly disappear. The morning of the interview, she stood backstage, clutching her small purse tightly. Her heart raced as she looked at the bright studio lights and cameras. The host smiled warmly as he welcomed her on stage. "Lena," he began, "your story has touched so many people. From working quietly in an office to moving the world with your piano. How does it feel?" She hesitated, then spoke softly but clearly. "It feels overwhelming. I never meant for any of this to happen. I just wanted to play again. Music was my way of remembering who I was before life got too heavy." The audience was silent. The host nodded gently. "And what made you stop playing all those years ago?" She took a deep breath. "I lost my father. He was the one who taught me to play. After he passed away, the piano became painful to touch. I thought if I avoided it, maybe I could avoid the memories too. But I was wrong. The music never left me. It waited for me until I was ready." You could hear the emotion in her voice, soft but honest. The audience applauded quietly, some wiping their eyes. When she performed a short piece at the end of the segment, even the camera operators seemed still, as if the entire room was breathing with her music. After that day, everything changed. The clip went viral again, reaching people from different parts of the world. Messages poured in, not just from fans, but from people sharing their own stories of lost dreams and second chances. One woman wrote, "I stopped painting when my husband passed away. After hearing your story, I picked up my brush again. Thank you." A young boy messaged, "My mom and I watched you together. I want to learn piano now." Lena would read these messages every night, often with tears in her eyes. She realized that what she had gone through, the pain, the silence, the rediscovery, wasn't just her story. It was a story many people carried inside them too. Despite all the attention, Lena stayed humble. She still worked at the office, helped her coworkers, and lived in her small apartment. The fame didn't change her. It simply reminded her of what mattered most: connection, kindness, and truth. One day, while she was leaving work, she was stopped by a familiar voice. "Lena," her boss said, walking toward her. He looked different now, softer, more thoughtful. "I wanted to tell you something," he said. "I've been thinking about what happened that night, and I realized how wrong I was. I underestimated you. Not just your talent, but your strength. You taught me something important." Lena smiled kindly. "What's that?" he sighed. "That people are more than their job titles. Everyone carries something inside them that we don't see." She nodded slowly. "That's true," she said. "Sometimes we forget that," he chuckled awkwardly. "So, I didn't quit after all," he said, trying to make light of his old words. Lena laughed softly. "Good," she replied. "You might have missed the music." They both laughed, and for the first time, there was real respect in his eyes. In the weeks that followed, Lena began teaching piano again, something she hadn't done since her teenage years. A few children from the neighborhood came to her small apartment every weekend. They would sit eagerly by the keyboard, their fingers stiff and unsure, just as hers once were. "Don't rush," she'd tell them gently. "The piano doesn't need speed. It needs feeling. Let your heart guide your hands." The children adored her, not just because of her story, but because of her kindness. She treated each one as if they were capable of greatness, no matter how off-key their notes were. Sometimes, while she taught, she would think of her father. She could almost hear his voice in her head, saying the same words to her long ago. The thought made her smile. In a way, she was keeping him alive through every lesson she gave. Months passed, and her students grew better. Some even performed at small recitals she helped organize. One of her students, a shy little girl who could barely look up from the keys, performed a piece so beautifully that the audience gave her a standing ovation. Lena watched from the side of the stage, tears in her eyes, remembering how far both of them had come. After the recital, the girl hugged her tightly and whispered, "I want to play like you someday." Lena smiled and whispered back, "You already do." Her story continued to inspire people, but she never let it define her. To her, the real success wasn't in the applause or recognition. It was in seeing others find the courage to chase what they loved. One evening, as she was locking up after class, she noticed a young man standing outside the door. He looked nervous but determined. "Are you Miss Lena?" he asked. She nodded. "Yes, can I help you?" "I saw your story online," he said. "I used to play, but I quit years ago. Life got in the way, I guess, but watching you made me want to start again. Would you teach me?" Lena paused for a moment, then smiled warmly. "Of course," she said. "Come inside." That evening, they sat together at the piano, and she began guiding him through the same simple exercises she had once taught herself as a child. The sound of hesitant notes filled the room, mixed with laughter and small mistakes. But to her it was perfect, because it meant someone else had found their way back to music. As time went on, more students joined. The small class turned into a modest community program. Some local sponsors even offered to fund instruments for children who couldn't afford them. Lena didn't ask for anything in return. She simply wanted to give others what her father once gave her, a chance. Her days became full again, not with stress or pressure, but with purpose. Every morning she'd wake up with a sense of calm, ready to teach, to listen, to play. And every evening, as she sat by her window, she'd whisper a quiet thank you to the life that had brought her full circle. One afternoon, as she was cleaning up after class, she received a letter from the music academy she had trained at in her youth. The letter was formal but heartfelt. They invited her to return, not as a student but as an honorary instructor. For a moment she just stared at the letter, overwhelmed. Years ago she had left that same academy in silence and grief. Now they wanted her back, not out of pity but respect. When she walked into the academy a week later, the memories came rushing back. The scent of the old wooden floors, the sound of pianos echoing from practice rooms, the faint hum of dreams being born in every note. She met the head of the academy, an elderly man who had known her father. His eyes softened when he saw her. "You've come a long way," he said gently. Lena smiled. "I just followed the music," she replied. He nodded. "And it led you home." That evening she stood in front of a classroom filled with young musicians. She looked around, feeling the weight of time and memory, and said softly, "Music isn't about perfection. It's about honesty. Play with your heart, not your hands. That's where the magic lives." The students listened quietly, their faces full of admiration. As she sat at the piano and began to play the same melody she once practiced as a child, she realized something. She wasn't just reliving her past anymore. She was rewriting it, her father's dream. Her silence, her rediscovery. It had all come together, perfectly imperfect, like a song that finally found its ending. When the last note faded, the students applauded. But Lena didn't need the applause to know what she had accomplished. Her life had become her greatest composition, one written with pain, courage, and grace. And as she closed the piano lid gently, she smiled, whispering to herself, "This time I won't stop." The years that followed were quiet but full of meaning. Lena had found something deeper than fame or applause. She had found peace. Her days were now spent teaching, guiding young students who carried the same spark she once had. Each morning when she walked into the academy, she could hear music drifting through the halls, a reminder that the world was still full of dreams waiting to be played. Her classroom had become a safe place. The walls were filled with small drawings and thank you notes from students. Some had written, "You made me believe in myself." Others simply wrote, "Thank you for letting me play." She never took those words lightly. They reminded her of what truly mattered, that music was not about impressing others, but expressing what words could never say. One cold afternoon, she sat by the window of the academy, watching the rain fall. It was one of those quiet days when the world felt still. She had finished her last lesson and was alone in the room, the piano gleaming softly in the dim light. She placed her hands on the keys, not to practice, but to feel, the way she used to when she was a child. The melody she played was gentle, full of memory. It spoke of loss, of time, of healing. As the notes filled the empty classroom, she felt tears slip down her face, not of sadness, but of gratitude. She whispered softly, "Thank you, Papa, for never letting me give up." That night, as she walked home under her umbrella, she noticed how different her life felt now. The same streets that once felt lonely were now filled with warmth. She was no longer just a woman who had rediscovered music. She was someone who had shared it with others, who had helped them find hope again. At home, she poured herself a cup of tea and looked at an old framed photograph on the shelf. It was her father, standing proudly beside a younger version of her at their old upright piano. The picture had faded over time, but the joy in their faces hadn't. She smiled and whispered, "You'd be proud of me now." The next morning, she received an unexpected letter. It was from a famous orchestra in the city, inviting her to perform at a charity concert dedicated to music teachers and mentors who had inspired others. They had heard about her journey and wanted her to close the event with a special piece. For a moment, she sat in silence, reading the letter over and over. The thought of performing on such a stage made her nervous, but something inside her told her it was meant to happen. It wasn't about proving herself anymore. It was about giving back. On the night of the concert, the Grand Theater buzzed with energy. The stage was lit beautifully and the seats were filled with musicians, students, teachers, and families. Lena stood backstage, her heart beating steadily. She wasn't scared this time. She was ready. When her name was announced, the audience greeted her with warm applause. She walked onto the stage, the lights softly shining on her face. Sitting down at the piano, she took a deep breath, closed her eyes, and began to play. The piece she had chosen wasn't one of the famous compositions she had performed before. It was something she had written herself, a melody that told her story. It began quietly, almost fragile, as if remembering the years she had been silent. Then it grew stronger, more alive, full of light and hope. The audience listened in complete silence, some leaning forward, some closing their eyes. Every note carried emotion, the struggles, the laughter, the loneliness, and the joy of finding one's way again. As she reached the final part of the piece, the melody softened once more like a gentle goodbye. Her fingers trembled slightly as she played the last note, letting it linger in the air until it faded into silence. For a moment, no one moved. Then, slowly, the applause began, quiet at first, then louder until the whole theater stood up. The sound filled the hall like thunder, but Lena didn't smile right away. She simply bowed her head, tears glistening in her eyes. She knew this was more than applause. It was the sound of every step she had taken, every pain she had endured, every small moment of courage that had brought her here. After the concert, many people came to meet her, students, teachers, even strangers who had been moved by her story. One young girl approached her shyly, clutching a small notebook. "Miss Lena," she said softly, "I'm learning piano, but sometimes I feel like giving up." "It's hard." Lena knelt down to her level and smiled. "It's okay to feel that way," she said gently. "But remember, music doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to be honest. Play from your heart. That's where the beauty comes from." The girl nodded, smiling shyly before walking away. Lena watched her go, realizing that she had become the kind of person her younger self needed, patient, kind, and full of quiet strength. As she left the theater that night, the city lights shimmered around her. The cold wind brushed her face, but she felt warm inside. She looked up at the sky and whispered softly, "I did it, Papa. I really did." Weeks passed and life slowly returned to its usual rhythm, but something inside Lena had changed forever. She was no longer just a teacher or a performer. She had become a storyteller using music as her voice. Her students began composing their own small pieces inspired by her courage. The Academy even hosted an annual event called The Heart Plays On, celebrating music born from emotion rather than fame. Every year, Lena would sit in the audience watching her students perform. She always smiled as she listened, not because the performances were perfect, but because they were full of truth. One evening, after a performance, the head of the Academy handed her a small envelope. Inside was a note that read, "For your years of dedication and for reminding us what music truly means." Attached was a key, the key to the old music room where she and her father had once practiced. When she unlocked that door later that night, she was hit by a rush of memories. The room had been preserved almost exactly as it was years ago. She walked to the piano, now polished and still beautiful, and placed her hand on it. She sat down and began to play the first song her father had ever taught her. Her fingers moved slowly, carefully, each note carrying a memory, and as the sound filled the room, she could almost feel his presence beside her, smiling the way he used to when she got the notes right. By the time she finished, the moonlight had spilled across the piano keys. She smiled through her tears, whispering, "This will always be our song." From that day on, Lena began visiting that room every week. Sometimes she played, sometimes she simply sat in silence, letting the past and present blend together. She didn't chase stages anymore, didn't seek recognition. She didn't need to. Her peace was in the music, and the music was in her. Years later, one of her students, now a young adult, would tell her, "You changed my life. I used to think music was just about sound, but you taught me it's about feeling." Lena smiled softly. "Music is the language of the soul," she said. "Once you learn to listen to it, it never leaves you." Her story became a quiet legend, not because she was a superstar, but because she had lived with grace, kindness, and truth. On her final evening at the academy before retirement, her students gathered to surprise her. They played her own composition, "The Heart Remembers," a piece she had once played at the charity concert. Hearing it played by so many hands, each note filled with emotion, made her heart swell with pride. When the last note faded, one of her students whispered, "This is for you, Miss Lena, for teaching us to believe." She stood up, tears shining in her eyes, and said softly, "No, my dear, it's for all of us. Because music doesn't end when the song stops. It lives in every heart it touches." As the evening came to an end, she walked out of the academy for the last time. The air was cool and the city was quiet. She stopped for a moment to look back at the building that had given her a second chance at life. Then she smiled, turned away, and walked down the street, her steps light, her heart calm. Somewhere in the distance, a piano played softly. She listened for a moment, smiled again, and whispered to herself, "The music never ends."